Well, we have some fun stuff to talk about today. In order to make time for that, I want to go ahead and get started. So, Rao, are you ready to give the community tech update?
Yes, I am. So basically, where we are right now is mainnet. There has not been any change, but we are getting a block merge test net. I said last week that block merge, we have the release candidate and we were testing it on the DevNet. That part is now complete and we are releasing a test net with the block merge release candidate one. Gurinder is trying to play with a couple of configurations for that testnet because basically this version of the block merge testnet will use a lot more CPU or will use as much CPU power as is available to it. But we will, in doing so, sometimes if we're trying to run multiple nodes on the same machine, the disk I/O becomes a bottleneck. And so he's playing with a couple of configurations to find the optimal balance between giving enough CPU and reducing the number of machines we need to run, and also make sure that disk I/O does not get in the way. So that's what he's doing, but we should have it available later today, maybe latest by tomorrow. That's the anticipation at this point in time. So with this, I encourage the community to run everything that they're doing on the regular testnet or any other development they're doing. Please use the block merge testnet so that we get some feedback from the community in terms of whatever. We have done a fair amount of testing, but when more people run their code on there, that certainly helps us discover issues that we may not have seen in our testing. So please do go ahead and use it as soon as it is available. It will be available with a faucet and everything, just like the regular testnet. So you should be able to use it right away. So that's the status of the networks. And in terms of the actual content of the work that the team has been doing, I think most of the changes for block merge are there in release one. And there are a couple of PRs that are expected over the next few days to next week. So there may be a release, there will be a release candidate tube, and anything else we discover through testing, either by us or by the community. So those will all be the next release candidate, and that should be the final one that will be going on the mainnet. So for now, basically, we're very focused on getting some thorough testing on the block merge version of the node, and if necessary, writing a few more tests for that purpose. That's the block merge going on the mainnet stream. Then there are things. I talked about these different categories of streams of work that we're doing earlier. So on the block merge that requires hard fork, there has not been any significant new activity here, but there was a fix to the removal of the channels map PR that Tomslav has merged. But this is something that we will be focusing on right after the block merge going on the mainnet is ready for basically once we're done with the testing on that and it's ready to go on the mainnet. Now, block merge changes are not the only things that are going to be part of the hard fork 2. And I will speak to that in just a minute because there's a whole bunch of things that are planned for hard fork 2. The plan is getting more detailed and the list is getting longer at this point in time, but it will stabilize soon enough, and then I'll speak to which parts we have already started working on. But before I go to hard fork 2, hard fork 1 work is mostly done for now. There is one PR that Will is working on to provide a transaction API that covers both user deploys and system deploys. Currently, the transaction server only covers user deploys, but not the system deploys. And this PR enables querying for what's going on in terms of transactions on both of those. And also, it enables each node to provide the transaction API services without having this transaction server that basically was sitting on the side earlier. What that meant was that somebody had to trust the transaction server to be a true replica of the activity that went on the nodes. Now, with this PR, once it's completed and has the reviews and fixes everything else, each node will be able to directly provide the transaction API services. So that is a good improvement. So that's what I wanted to say about the hard fork one related things. I mean, there's more a feature enhancement. It's not quite required or related to hard fork one, but we're just categorizing it there right now. Now, going to hard fork 2 planning, there's a lot more clarity on what are all the things we need to do there. So we talked about the hard fork changes needed for leaderless block merge. And that's one category of tasks or items that need to be worked on. Proof of stake contract changes to eliminate slashing errors and enable some short configurations and change some of the short configurations. So that's another class of items. Then there is a desire, because once we go decentralized, if there are multiple external validators, the idea is that if there is a problem, we should be able to resolve that mostly through a soft fork process. So this safe soft fork process is an important piece of this. And the idea is that whether it is any changes to systems contracts that we're doing or other changes that need a soft fork-like scenario, that we're able to transition the state from, say, state A to state B in a safe manner. And that's the piece that's being worked on in this. So it's a little delicate and will need a lot of testing, but that's one of the pieces that we're targeting for hard fork 2. And changes to RevVault.row. This is something that Isaac had started on already, and then there's a PR in there that's being reviewed, and he's improving or making changes to it. However, in looking at this and everything else that we're doing, it seems like it may be beneficial to implement RevVault in the Scala part of the code base. And Tomislav is exploring that possibility and the benefits thereof. Some of the benefits we think we may gain from that approach would be to improve performance and then enable merging of the balances easily. And then the hardware solution that we're coming up with can also benefit from this. As well as I think Raphael was running into this issue in his dApp development. So dApp development should be easier. So it looks like on balance, even though this is not a task that we really want to take on lightly, to say, oh, let's go ahead and do this in Scala. On balance, it appears that the cost benefit here, the benefits outweigh the cost. So we will take a look at it and see, do a small prototype and see if we find any hairy situations. And if we don't, we'll probably continue along this path with that. So there are two different aspects to the RevVault. One is the stuff that Isaac is working on, and then this new idea to try out a Scala implementation. So that's another class of changes in hard fork 2. Then there is replacing protobufs with Captain Proto is another task, and that has a bunch of subtasks related to that. And out here or in this area, Dennis has started working full-time this week, and he has submitted a preparatory PR to add manual row types as a preparation for eventually going to Captain Proto. There are quite a few things here that require deep knowledge of the code base and how protobufs are used in different parts of the system. So Tomislav is going to work with Dennis closely to separate out the pieces that are either too entangled or too complicated from the ones that are relatively straightforward, and then work with Dennis to get this implemented. So that's what's going on there. And then there will be a bunch of bug fixes we need to take care of. We talked about the end of quarantine bug that was discovered on the testnet a little while ago, I think a couple of weeks ago or 1 week ago. And then there's the rewards calculation stuff that we need to do, and that is dependent on having BigInt as available as a function. And then there are a bunch of other bugs that need to be fixed as part of hard fork 2. As we make changes to either system contacts or whatever in during the hard fork 2 process, we have also decided that we'll start implementing those in Golang 1.1, because if we're touching everything here to hard fork 2, there is no reason not to at least get these going in Golang 1.1. So that's another aspect to what we're doing here. And some of these things, some of these changes may have to go through an RChip review and approval process, and we will do that as part as the tech governance, through the tech governance process. And as you can imagine, with all these changes that we're planning for hard fork 2, a lot of time will be devoted or needs to be allocated for testing. So that's another aspect of all of that. So that's kind of where we are with that. And in terms of what we're implementing out of hard fork 2, I already spoke to all of this. And the channels map removal work is, I think, mostly complete at this point in time. The other stuff here is just left for reference. When we get to updated performance numbers and or when we have the hard fork testnet available, we'll talk to that more as to what needs to be done. But basically, no guarantees of keeping state in the hard fork 2 testnet. And I mean, that's partly the reason why we're also doing block merge testnet that's going on the mainnet as a separate testnet at this point in time. The reason being, if people are trying to use the main testnet for things that they want to leave the state in there for a period of time, at least the block merge testnet being a separate testnet does not disturb that. And that really, once that block merge version goes on the mainnet, they will all become one testnet, and then there will be the testnet 2, which is the hard fork testnet. So that's, I think that's the gist of what I wanted to cover today. Are there any questions, comments for anybody?
Rao?
Yeah.
Can you go back to 4.5, a little higher up in the document here?
Yes, replacing protobufs, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, forgive me if I'm ignorant of this, but does that mean that so Argov is using protobuf in doing its communication, and we've just put together an automated testing framework that I believe also uses protobuf. Is this going to require a change to all of that?
Yep, unfortunately.
All right.
There's no easy way around it.
No, I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But so what you're saying is that, so is this part of Hard Fork 2 or Hard Fork 1?
Hard Fork 2.
Okay.
This is, that's, so you have a few months.
Yeah.
Hard Fork 1 is just carrying over the balances and none of the rest of the state from the current blockchain.
Okay, so so that means that once Hard Fork 2 is in place, there's going to be a massive upgrade for all of the applications, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you will have the Hard Fork 2 testnet available sooner than later, though this Captain Proto work may take a little while if that's what you're trying to test against. But the Hard Fork 2 will be available as a testnet so that you have enough time for migration.
Yeah, so specifically, we were hoping in Argov to put out a usable user interface for the October voting. And I'm just trying to figure out the timing of all of this. I'm not sure what work is going to go into moving to Cap'n Proto.
That's a good question. I think as of now, the thinking is that you should be good if you're looking at the October timeframe for testing, like meaning we're hoping that basically the Hard Fork 2 should be on the mainnet by end of September, maybe sooner, but basically that's what we're looking at.
Okay, so right now, Argov is using our local host development environment for a lot of our work, just because it makes development easier and faster. Okay, so I'm not quite sure how to ask this question. So right now we're doing a Genesis using the existing RNode package that's out there. In order to effectively work on this migration from protobuf to Cap'n Proto, we're going to need an updated package of RNode so that we can do local host development to do this migration. Does that make sense? Did I ask that right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, and you're correct, right? But we'll make sure that the tooling is available, long in advance of switching over.
Okay, all right. It's just that there's work here to do, and we would really like to get the UI out for October. So,
Bill, the Argov developer interfaces uses the Arcade API. It doesn't use protobuf. The test framework does, is Python, and that does use the protobufs.
Okay, so our test framework is going to need some updates, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Then it's just work that needs to be done then.
Sounds good. But of course, we will keep you in the loop, and as soon as we have versions for you to try out locally, like you're talking about, we'll make them available. So
now the Rolang 1.1, I knew about the translator that translates 1.1 to 1. Do we actually have a full implementation of 1.1?
No, we only have the translator at this point in time, and there is basically we need to run performance tests on that to see where the performance bottlenecks are and all that. But the point I'm making, or the thing I was talking about when I mentioned Rolang 1.1, is that to the extent that we're changing all our not changing or touching pretty much most of the existing contracts, the idea is that we will go ahead and do those contracts in the Rolang 1.1 so that we don't have to go back and do that again later. But it would still be using only the, the contracts will be ready for Rolang version 1.1. Let me put it that way. There's not any optimization planned at this time, unless time allows. We might look into that, but It's more not having to go back into the same contracts a second time just for Roland 1.1 changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, when we actually have full 1.1, we'll have to update those contracts. Are we going to be able to do that without another hard fork?
I think, well, yeah, that, I guess the soft fork process that I talked about, I don't know if it can or cannot cover that. It's still being designed and tested at this point in time. Or I would say it's being designed, let's just say. That's kind of where it is. So I'm not sure. The intention of this whole
The short answer is in principle, yes. If there's any part of the optimized Roland 1.1 that gets pushed into Scala in a certain way, then we'll have to have another hard fork. But if it's with the translated version, it will all go under soft fork. So we'll have to see how what's the best way to do the optimizations from that point.
Yeah, the hope is to avoid a third hard fork. Is really what we would like. Now, whether we can commit to that at this point, I don't know. Does that answer you, Jim?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All right, over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Daryl, are you around to do the community week in review?
I am here.
All right.
Hey, everybody. So here's the week in review for Thursday, June 10th to today, Wednesday, June 16th. Thursday in the governance committee call, there was discussion around co-op policy regarding ROC sitting on DEXs. On Friday at the Climate Coordination RCast, last Friday, we did two separate RCasts. The first one is up on blog.rchain.coop right now. And in it, we discussed heat concerns at the Tokyo Olympics. We discussed that climate change could cost G7 nations twice as much money as the pandemic did every year. We also talked about the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline. Steve Ross Talbot presented the start of a blockchain efficiency metrics page for RChain. And Greg gave a presentation of his Towards a Living World update. Then the second RCast we did on Friday was with a guest named Joseph Purdom, who is an XR director for a virtual reality app for the Oculus Quest called Ecosphere. And that one will be up when I finish editing it. On Monday, on the Casper Stand-Up, this week's Casper Stand-Up tied in with Friday's Climate and Coordination call, providing a more in-depth update on the Living World research. On Tuesday, in the Communications Working Group, we dove deeper into updating the CoinMarketCap info, the metrics page idea as an info page of things developers would want, like a rev price, flow price, fees compared to other chains, kilowatts per hour, number of external validators, etc. And we also discussed updates on the press kit webpage progress. And this morning at the RChain Active Member Hangout, we discussed high-level thoughts around the collaborative music application that Greg is going to be talking about. And Bill gave an RGov developer interface update with the work he's done towards color coding developer tools for Rolang. And that brings us to now.
Any questions for Daryl?
I just wanted to add that yesterday, Camilla ran a panel on blockchain, state of the art and futures at the Washington, D.C. ISSA. It's a International Security Professionals Association, basically. These are the guys that typically have CISP certification and other security certifications. And Greg and I were on the panel to answer their questions around blockchain. Maybe Greg, I don't know if you were planning to talk about that.
No, I'm glad you mentioned it. That's great. Yeah, it was very successful. It was Rao and Camilla were stars. So it's really and there was a lot of engagement from the audience. We had many questions, and they were all good questions, more market and technically specific.
Yeah, I think the link to that will be available on their website, and we'll publish it out in Discord or whatever when that's available.
Yep. All right. We did have a special board meeting. It was entirely informational. No votes were taken, so nothing to report there. I do have some very good news about an engagement with a large asset collection. I can't say any more here, but I will be talking about it on the Friday closed door session. So excellent news for ArtChain. Please tune in on Friday if you want to find out about that. Any questions or comments from the community before I launch into another discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to announce an event we have coming up on Friday. It's a DAPI live session. So our ArtChain member, Raphael, has built this this ArtChain DAPI. Let me just drop it in the chat. And version 4.2, he's doing a live session Friday at around 6 a.m. Pacific. And he'll be going over some of the things you can do, like connecting to the ArtChain testnet 1, creating web pages, NFTs, linking web pages together, sending tips to one another. And if you're looking to participate, I recommend going to dapi.tech and downloading the newest version and making sure you can connect to the GammaNet. So you'll be all set up and ready to go Friday.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, this is a really excellent development. I heartily encourage people to engage. All right, any other questions, comments, concerns before we launch into the next topic? Okay, so I would like to talk about another of consensus games. So I have presented on this channel and the Artcast a variety of consensus games. So I want to talk about a new one, and I am soliciting bids. I will privately fund development of a proof of concept of this. So if there are developers here now or who view this later, I am accepting bids for work to make a proof of concept. People can certainly team up to put together a bid, or they can bid on just pieces of the work. But that will be from me privately as opposed to the co-op. So
that bids in rev or dollars or?
I'll take either rev or dollars. I mean, I'll pay rev or dollars, yeah. Okay. So essentially the idea is we're going to do a kind of consensus game involving music. Now, it doesn't have to just involve music, which we'll talk about at the end. But the components of the game, in much the same way that you think about a board game, so there's going to be some things that are kind of like a virtual board or play space, the space of engagement. And then there are two teams of players. The board is made of pools. We can think of the pools as providing timbres, like violin, viola, cello, double bass. They could be other timbres, and you don't necessarily have to have 4 of them. You could have more, you could have less. But for purposes of discussion, we'll imagine that we have 4 pools. And these pools are going to be associated with timbres. Each pool is going to have separate copies of 2 namespaces. We'll refine this idea towards the end of the presentation, but for now, to be specific and definite, let's imagine that namespace 1 consists of 37 channels. So these are 37, specific channels that can be used in Rolang. So it's one channel for each of the 12 pitches in 3 octaves. So that's 36 plus one channel for a rest. And the second namespace consists of 8 channels. So one channel for each of 5 durations corresponding to 16th note through whole note, plus channels for 16th, 8th, and quarter note triplets. So again, each pool will have these 2 namespaces inside them, and the namespaces will be separate from pool to pool. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Very good. As I've said before, you can have different timbres. So for example, you might have a bass, a keyboard, an electric and acoustic guitar timbres, and you can have more than 4 pools. In each of the pools, we are going to have a supply of Rolang processes that have a particular shape. So here is the shape. So it's going to be a join. The join is listening on one of the pitch channels, so from the pitch namespace, and one of the duration channels, from the duration namespace. When it receives, obviously, both inputs, then it has enough information to make a sound. So now the sound is going to be recorded to something that can be played back later. And this is not a real-time sounding environment yet. It can become so as we achieve certain scale milestones. But this is essentially recording the fact that you've got a sound to something that you can then later play back. So as an example, you can imagine that you have a 4 comprehension that is listening on the A3 channel, that would be the A440 channel, and the quarter note channel. So when it gets both an A3 output and a quarter note output, then it has enough information to record that you're playing A3 for the duration of a quarter note. Likewise, for C3 and 8th note, when you get both of those, you have enough information to record that you are going to play a C3 and then an 8th note. Is this making sense to people?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so now notice that these processes do not recurse. So the duration of the game is in part controlled by how many of these processes are available in each of the pools. So that's one resource limitation that decides the conclusion of the game. Now, there are, as I said, there are 2 teams of players. Team 1, we will alternatively call musicians or player, when the term doesn't cause confusion, and team 2 is audience. So team musician, a musician has basically a simple actions. They can output either on a pitch channel or a duration channel, and when they output a token that is specific to the game. For purposes of our discussion, let's call this the MC token. So as an example, suppose Alice outputs in one of the pools, let's say the viola pool. Alice outputs A3 100, while Bob outputs into the viola pool quarter note 50. Then the process A3 quarter note can pick up those 2 outputs and record that sound. Now, it might be that you have other players, say Deirdre and David, who are also outputting on A3 and quarter note channels. The outputs with more tokens supplied are more likely to be picked up than others. Right? So you can have competition for the sound listener. the listener that is going to create a sound. And that will relate later to the economics, but keep that in mind. So this is just a physical picture, sorry, a cartoon picture of what I'm suggesting. So here's Bob, here's Alice. Bob is outputting on the quarter note channel with 50 token. So notice that this uses the Roland 1.1 syntax. So Bob is deploying to the viola pool this output, and Alice is deploying to the viola pool this output. And so the listener in the pool can pick that up and record that A440 quarter note. Now on the audience side, team audience, they listen to the piece of music that is produced. So the audience doesn't get a turn until after all the musicians have spent all their tokens and or used up all of the listening processes that are available in the pools. So after hearing the music, Carol, let's say, who is a member of team audience, votes thumbs up or thumbs down. So does she support this as a piece of music or find it to be drivel? If the performance gets a threshold, so for purposes of definiteness, let us say this is 2/3 of audience support. So if the performance gets 2/3 of audience support, there is a payout of 2/3 of the tokens that were collected. Now there are two ways to collect tokens. You've seen one of them, which is that players are having to spend tokens in order to play. That musicians are spending tokens in order to play. Team audience members also have to spend tokens to get a seat to listen to the music. So they have to pay for a ticket to hear the performance, so to speak. So that will result in the game collecting some number of tokens. Now let's call that the kitty. So there's a payout of 2/3 of the kitty that will go, that will pay out to all the participants in the game. 1/3 is going to go to pay for the operation of the game. In the case that the performance gets 2/3 support from the audience, then the kitty is split evenly between audience and players. So hopefully that's all clear. So here's another depiction of what I'm saying. Here's the kitty. Half of, in the case that the performance got 2/3 support from the audience, half of 2/3 of the kitty, in other words, 1/3 of the kitty will go to the players or musicians, and the other half of the 2/3, in other words, 1/3, will go to the audience, team audience. Now, suppose that the performance does in fact not get support from the audience. Then there is a coin flip. So a coin is tossed in the air. We get a random bit, random value of 0 or 1. And if it's heads, then 7/12 of the tokens are paid out to audience. And if it's tails, 7/12 are paid out to players. And in this case, no matter what happens with the coin flip, 5/12 of the kitty goes to the game to pay for the operation of the game. So here's a depiction of that. Here's the coin flip. And you can see that depending on the outcome of the coin flip, 7/12 will go to the players or 7/12 will go to the audience. So it is not necessarily in the audience's best interest to vote either thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So if they try to game the system, they encounter risk in either path in terms of maximizing just for economics as opposed to aesthetics. So they have motivation to make an honest aesthetic judgment when they cast their vote. Now you will notice that we can modify the game in lots of different ways. For example, chromatic scales are subtle, and making good note choices is often a high level of skill. Making good pitch choices is often a high level of skill. And so you can make easier versions of these games. So for example, instead of having the pitch namespace have 37 channels, you could have it have 16. So that's 3 octaves of a pentatonic scale plus a rest, right? So in general, wind chimes, for example, are tuned in pentatonics because random sequences of pentatonic scales are found to be pleasing. You can up the complexity for a slightly more sophisticated group, musically inclined group. So you have 22 channels. So that's 3 octaves of a diatonic scale plus a rest. So there, the diatonic scales are richer. It's harder to make mistakes, but you can still, you know, not have the most pleasant melody or harmony played out using diatonic scales. And then finally, level 3 would be the chromatic pitch namespace. So that's one example. Now there's another example. You can change this from musical to creating an animation. So if instead of making sound, you imagine that you've got a grid, like a hex grid or some other kind of grid, you know, could be just ordinary square grid, or potentially even a graph where you have vertices that can be colored. But whatever your canvas is, it's going to have places, locations that are like the pools, where you can output either a color or a duration. So instead of making a piece of music, you'll make a piece of visual art or animation, in fact. So the colors will shift and change over time because as you can see, people are placing particular colors and certain durations in given locations on the grid. So that's another variant of the game. All of these have a very similar flavor in the sense that the players are participating in the creation of something larger than themselves. There is an aesthetic judgment there. So there's both aesthetic feedback as well as economic feedback. And so this constitutes a class of game which is rare, in my opinion, in the existing gaming world. And I believe it is a design space that is very much worth considering as we're trying to figure out new and interesting coordination mechanisms. So let me stop there and take any questions, comments, feedback.
Oh, I've got a couple comments. One is it was nice to see the Church of the Subgenius represented there on one of those slides.
Yes, J.R. Bob Dobbs.
Yeah. And the other is I'm a little confused about how it is a performance. Like, is this all occurring live? So all of this isn't like a collaboration that kind of happens over time. Is it something that's occurring at like live?
It's asynchronous, but live. So,
Okay.
think about like a multi-person game, like World of Warcraft or something. Those kinds of multi-person games are somewhat asynchronous. You do need to be synchronously online for certain kinds of campaigns, but people can come and go. Right, so the actions that the team musician takes can all be done sort of in a relatively synchronous fashion, right? So they can communicate with each other and they can coordinate with each other as much as they wish out of band. We can even provide communication channels within the game so that people can message each other and say, hey, well, I will, I'll send, a whole note duration to the cello pool if you will send an F sharp note to the cello pool, for example.
Okay.
Those that can all be done synchronously, and then or relatively synchronously. What is not synchronous is hearing the music as it's being created. You could do that once our chain reaches certain scales, so it becomes a good measure for our chain's performance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just kind of picturing how traditional techno music is created, which involves a well, the original techno was analog sequencers that would basically cycle through, and you would be able to flick a switch, and that would signify a note on. And so the interface was kind of it was kind of, you basically experiment until you hear something that sounds good. With this approach, do you have to kind of predeterminately kind of know the notes before you implement them, or is there some kind of approach where you can kind of play around until you kind of find the note that you want, if you know what I mean?
You can certainly play around. I mean, the important thing is that you can explore music making with this approach in any way that you want. So someone who is an expert, so you could have a Jacob Collier come to this, and Jacob has perfect pitch, has astonishing rhythmic skills and a great command of how to express this both in performance and on score. And so he could play this game at a very high level because he could hear in his head, okay, I want a bass line that looks like this, that has this kind of contour, right? I want a cello line that has this contour. I need the violins to be doing this, and I need the viola to be doing that, right? And so he knows what he wants to hear, and then he may not have all of the MC tokens that he wants to accomplish that, right? So he will then horse trade with the other players to begin to have the kind of contours that he's interested in happen. But you could also go to completely the other end of the spectrum. So you could have a 6-year-old who has no idea what it's going to sound like, and they can just send in events and see what happens.
So it would be more expensive.
But not necessarily. Like we haven't said what the price is, right?
Yeah.
And also, like, if everyone is playing in a way that they're playing low stakes because they're not aggressively trying to make sure that their outcome happens, right? If you're willing to live with uncertainty about whether or not your outcome happens, then again, it's kind of an experiment.
Yeah, and I guess part of the whole experiment is that you're reacting over what other people have done already. So
Correct. Yes,
you're
exactly.
a collaborative process.
Yeah, and so you can hear what has been recorded to date, right? So as the comm events happen, you've got enough of, you can hear, what's been recorded so far, and then that can influence your decisions as to what you want to hear next.
Right.
Since this will be producing a work of art, have you thought about who will own the right to the piece if it turns out to be original?
Almost certainly it will be original. But the thought is that it, you can create NFTs, but it's owned by the community that produces it. Right. So
in what proportion? I mean, one player, one share?
Nope. It's how much MC you've spent. That's your share.
So the drummer in me is wondering whether percussion can be represented as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So instead of, so you could imagine that you have pools, one for each kind of drum. right?
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
Kind of
then
almost like you could kind of create a beat like with a drum machine. You know, it's kind of like a really slow interface of, you know, making a beat,
Yeah.
like the way a drum machine would work.
Oh, it's not necessarily slow, right? You can deploy a par that you know does a whole bunch of beats all at once, right? One to each pool,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So you can do a giant output of so again once you pick pools that are for each drum, you don't have to have the you don't necessarily have to have a pitch namespace. You would only have a duration namespace
Okay.
for the drums,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
But
So
you could do pitch drums as well, but only
right. Okay. So I'm kind of picturing myself like almost like kind of creating offline for a while until I kind of find things that I seem to like for example, if it was, you know, making a beat, I kind of make a beat offline and then I'd kind of parse out, you know, what that would be and translate it for this format and then, you know, basically register it onto the chain.
you could do it that way, but remember you're interacting with other players, and so
Mhm.
they may compete with, you know, so just to put it in drummer terms, imagine that you've got an orchestra of congas. Okay, so you've got a bunch of congas of different heights and different you know diameters for the drum heads, right? And now you've got a group of drummers all standing around those drums, and everybody kind of gets that if two people strike the drum at the same time, it's not going to sound great unless they are highly skilled. So everyone is kind of reading everyone else's body language. And so you can tell that if you were intending to strike the drum, but somebody else got there first, then you don't get that drum hit, right? So maybe you were going to place a slap on the conga, but someone else decided to play a bass on it, right? And they were just a hair faster than you were, right? Which is equivalent to adding more token to the output. That's what the experience will be like. And as long as you built up the pipeline deep enough, you can have a real enough time experience. So you're listening to what's happened so far, right? And you could kind of have that on repeat, right? You loop what's happened so far, and then you add something to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you could play it the way you're suggesting, but that would leave out, you know, certain aspects of the experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like the irritating person in a jam session that kind of just becomes like the hog that just kind of like
Yeah, exactly.
it's just that person's usually not very much fun.
Exactly. You've got it. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I'm wondering, does the game end, or is it go for indefinitely?
It ends, and the reason it ends is there are two reasons. First, the players could run out of MC token, right? They come to the party with however much MC token they've got, right? And they don't have an infinite supply, so they could run out of MC token. But the other resource constraint are the sounding processes. So when you start the game, you've only got a fixed number of those. And once you play once you've supplied inputs to all of them, you're done. So even if the players have a very large supply of MC token, the game finishes because you only have so many sounding events that are available.
Okay. This sounds like something that we might be able to reproduce manually with a set of instructions that we follow by way of, say, a PDF or something, to get maybe a better understanding of how the game works, especially with the more simpler scales.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is totally playable. This is totally playable in amongst a bunch of musicians. The one thing that's unique about this, like I'm unaware of any physical instrument that separates that gives a distinct control over both pitch and duration. Like if you think about it, if you play a guitar, you don't have two people controlling how long, one person controlling which fret to play on, which string and which fret, and another person saying for how long. Right? That's all inside, the hands of one guitarist. Yeah, mostly. I mean, there are some interesting, there's some interesting videos of people, many people playing one guitar, but it's still it's roughly that same property. And the same is true for flutes or violins or pianos or hammered dulcimers. All of them have this property that a single musician is in control of both the pitch and the duration. This is physically unique in the sense that it separates those two.
Okay.
But it seems to me that the game ends only when everybody runs out of tokens, because everything is asynchronous, right? So
no. Again, if you only have so many listening processes, so you could easily run out of listening processes long before you run out of tokens.
Oh, suppose there is a particular pitch and duration bid, and as of now, person A has that on pitch, and then another person has it on duration. Now, if another person comes along and bids more token, what happens then on either one of those?
It really depends, right? Because there's going to be there's effectively a window in which you do the deployment, right? And if the deployment gets selected, it is possible for a lower bid deployment to be selected if the higher bid comes in too late.
So basically, that deployment is kind of like the round of the play, and when the round is closed, the round is closed. You cannot revisit that
That's right.
In a future round, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So you can think of the round as everyone gets, a chance to do a certain number of deploys.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's a great question. Very, very, very clarifying. Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat from Tom. What is your estimate of when we can start playing the game?
Well, it depends on who steps up to help with the development. I'd love to. I mean, you can simulate it with a bunch of devoted folks. As Gary was pointing out, you can simulate it now. So you can just get blag a bunch of your mates to come over and you can follow the rules and play it. And you can use Monopoly money for the bids. But if you want it to be built on top of our chain, well, I need to get some development bids, and then we'll see how long it takes the development to happen. Thank you so much for your time and attention on this. Hopefully, what this does is it begins to create an understanding of Archain, the platform, and consensus in general, and what consensus might mean, and how we can work together in a way that we have both an aesthetically pleasing outcome and an economically pleasing outcome. And with that, thank you all. Please stay safe, and I'll see you on the other side.